I've just returned from doing the Badger Divide, a 200 mile or 320 kilometre off-road gravel bikepacking route in Scotland from Inverness to Glasgow. It doesn't get much more remote than this. Absolutely breathtaking landscape that we are riding through.
Here he goes. Oh.
And this is a bike I used for the challenge. There will be a video on my adventure later in the week, but for now I want to go through the bike, equipment and setup I used and go through it in detail and see what you all think of it. Regular subscribers will know that earlier in the year I rode the King Alfred's Way and I chose my own personal Fairlight Cycles Sacan, a steel gravel bike with 40mm wide tyres, carbon rims and a full suite of Apidura bikepacking bags. And for this challenge, with the Scottish hills being as big as they are, I opted for a lighter weight and hopefully a faster setup, which meant carbon in place of steel. And also I wanted to see if carbon with the wheels to frame can be used on a off-road bikepacking adventure where you have to be self-sufficient and repair any problems you might have. I know there's lots of worry and fear around carbon being used for bikepacking and gravel riding with rocks striking the frame, so I'm keen to find out whether the frame and the wheels would survive. And if you're wondering what this bike weighs, as you see it right here without full water bottles, well, I'll reveal the weight at the end of the video, so get guessing down in the comments as you watch the video and let me know what you think this bike weighs. So the frame is a Salsa Warbird. This is a 4th generation of a frame largely considered to be the very first gravel race bike ever launched, going back like 10 years now. And the frame offers good geometry, good clearance and good comfort, and it really proved itself over the 3-4 days of riding we did in Scotland. So ample tyre clearance, lots of mounts for accessories and bottles, and the geometry is a nice balance between being lively and fast, but also stable thanks to the longer wheelbase and longer rear stays, and a slightly slacker head angle as well. And then up front, in place of the normal rigid carbon fork the Salsa Warbird ships with, I opted for the brand new RockShox Rudy suspension fork. Now you might have seen a separate review video on this previously on my channel, link down below in case you missed it. And let me tell you, I was glad of the 30mm of travel this fork offers on some of the rougher tracks and some of the long days we spent riding this route from Inverness to Glasgow. Now normally on a long gravel ride, I would have a fairly tired upper body, my arms would take a hammering, but this fork gave me a lot of extra comfort and I really appreciated that on the long rides and the rougher tracks. And as well as extra comfort, it gave me more control and therefore more fun on some of the longer rocky tracks that were the reward for all the climbing we did on this route. So for me, this product really proved itself in the tough proving grounds of the Scottish Highlands, and I would definitely consider this if you're looking to do some really rough, extreme gravel bikepacking. Also providing extra comfort were the brand new Zip 101 Explore wheels launched as part of the new Explore family of products a few months ago. I've been riding them for a few weeks here on my local trails, but this Scottish ride was my first big test for the wheels. And while you might think this idea of compliance built into a single wall carbon rim design is a gimmick, it's not, it really works. And definitely offers a layer of extra smoothness, of extra comfort, in addition to the wide tyres and the suspension fork. The ride is noticeably smoother than a deep section aero carbon rim or a shallow alloy wheel. So it's less buzz, less vibration coming through the bike, the contact points. The ride is calmer, also a bit quieter as well. And the width of the rims, and they are massive, a whopping 27mm internally, wider than most normal rims externally, gives a nice broad platform for the 40mm wide tyres I was using. So nice low pressures, no tyre squirming, no dinging from hitting rocks and roots like you normally would on a deep section carbon rim. And looking at the rims now, there's no damage to them at all. There's no sign that they've taken any abuse. The spoke tension is still really good. So for me, these wheels definitely added extra comfort and control to the bike. And while they're probably not as fast as an aero section, Our average speed for the entire ride was between 16 and 17 kilometers per hour, although there were sections of 30 to 35 on some of the smoother roads and gravel tracks we encountered. The speeds were low enough that the comfort these gave and the control they gave outweighed the loss of aero benefit. And then wrapped around the carbon rims are Zip's latest G40 Explore tyres. So a 40mm wide tyre, tan sidewalls that look the business, but I was worried the low profile tread pattern will be a handful on some of the muddier, wetter tracks we would encounter, and which we did encounter. But the tread compound is sticky enough that there's good traction on wet roots and rocks. So I had no issue with traction, no durability issues at all, no punctures, not a single puncture. Looking at the tyres now, there's no cuts or gashes on the top or indeed along the sidewalls. So the tyres at 32 to 35 psi front to rear were bomb-proof, really. Fast rolling, grippy and durable. Gearing choices for a bike packing adventure comes down to personal preference. As many of you know, I do like one by the simplicity it offers, and I use SRAM's latest Explore gearing. So a single 42 tooth chainring on the front and their brand new 1044 cassette on the back with a new rear derailleur that matches. So electronic wire shifting 12 speed with hydraulic disc brakes. The only thing I would change on this bike, the gearing, if I was doing this ride again, was to fit a smaller chainring. The 42 was a little bit meaty for some of the bigger climbs, so a 40 would have been a better option. That's me not really planning ahead and really researching the climbing that we would encounter enough, but for the most part the gearing worked really well. And one really neat feature of the group set, as I've mentioned before, is how the app lets you look at what gears you use the most, and that's quite fascinating. Because of the 21 hours of ride time in total for the trip, I spent 4.5 hours in the 44 tooth rear sprocket. So I was definitely making use of that big sprocket. And while the gearing was a little bit tall on some of the bigger, longer climbs, that's the beauty of one bike. You can easily swap the chain ring, go down to 40, I would have been just fine. The only issue really keeping the chain well lubed at the end of the day, but the group set took a pounding, no washing, covered in grit as you can see, and worked faultlessly the whole time. I will do a separate review on that group set and the gearing. I want to talk a bit more about the gearing, how it compares to Campagnolo's Ekar 13-speed one by group set as well, but that comes in a future video. Back in the summer when I rode the King Alfred's Way on my Fairlight, I used a full suite of Apiduro bags, the typical bike packing setup with a handlebar bag, a frame pack and a seat pack. Now for this trip, being a harder trip with more climbing and rougher gravel tracks and much less tarmac, I wanted to try and streamline my approach and go for a lighter setup and address some of the issues I found with that more traditional bike packing setup. And I also wanted to try a Tailfin rear rack. Now many of you might be aware of Tailfin, a small company based down in Bristol. I actually met the founder Nick when I was working at RockShox when he launched the brand, and I was very impressed with what he was working on, but I'd never had the chance to try it until now. This is a Tailfin Aero Pack alloy. There is a fancier, lighter weight carbon version if you want it. And this has the roll top bag integrated into the rack itself. So fitting the rack is a breeze. You swap the axle out, clip these adapters onto the axle, onto the seat clamp, and hey presto, you are ready to go. So much easier to fit than a seat pack. And the problem with a seat pack this one addresses is it's fixed more firmly to the frame, and you get that annoying swaying of a seat pack when you're riding out of the saddle. The other benefit as well is a roll top bag. The 20-litre bag is much easier to pack and to access during a ride than a seat pack. You have to be careful packing this as you do with a seat pack, but this you can easily access stuff during a ride, and I found that really handy for extra clothing or food stored herein. And also packing everything, because the flat bottom is easier in my experience than the tube shape of a seat pack where you put your heavy stuff at the end and then try and stuff everything afterwards. And having it really rigid on the frame is a benefit as well, it doesn't sway around. And a weight penalty is pretty marginal, it has to be said. Now it is quite pricey, it's more expensive than a seat pack and it's more expensive than a titanium rack. But I think the design, the durability of it and the modular aspect of it definitely outweighs the price a little bit. And you can have this for commuting, you can have it for weekend rides, and also bikepacking adventures as well. So lots of use out of it. And I see a rack like this being on a bike fairly permanently really, even for a short ride. Put a few bits and bobs in there, save you in your pockets or frame pack, and it keeps everything behind you nice and aero as well, and keeps everything high up off the ground, and also acts as a mud guard. And because I was trying to keep the bike as light as possible, I put most of my stuff in this bag, and then simply use a handlebar bag for my sleeping equipment and a small top tube bag for food and other accessories, and didn't use a frame pack for the first time. So now let me give you a little peek inside my bags and show you what I carried, and we'll start at the back with the Tailfin. And this has a 20-litre capacity, which I definitely use all of. Very easy roll top design, means you can access it during a ride, and it's definitely waterproof as I found out. So in here to start with, I have my puffer coat, need that quite a bit, definitely chilly in the mornings and the evening, so that's easily accessible. And then I have a small bag, and inside there is all my clothing. So lightweight trousers for the evening, a t-shirt and kind of a mid-weight thermal long sleeve top for the evenings as well. Lots of spare socks, some underwear, and I think that's everything. Some gloves as well. So all my clothing in there, so it's nice and easy, contained in one bag. And it's just an old sleeping bag, so that's in there. And a pair of super lightweight trainers for walking around in the evenings. Seems a bit of luxury that. And then we have my titanium mug and my gas canister and some hot chocolate and coffee in there. A little gas stove in there, and a stove unit somewhere else as well. And I took a head torch just in case, didn't actually use it. Then I got a small bag, all my tools in here. It's just some inner tubes really. I'm tubeless, but inner tubes. Nice lightweight inner tubes there. A multi-tool and some tubeless repair darts. Those in there. A survival blanket just in case. And I also had a bag of toiletries, which they're not in there at the moment. So pretty much everything I had in there. Also had lots of food, which I ate during the ride, flapjacks and malt loaves and other bits and bobs. And let's move to the front. The top tube bag was mostly used for food, flapjacks, my mobile phone and other bits and bobs that you need. And I still got some saurine in there after lunch, nice. And then up front, Apogoro bag. The webbing on the front is great for the waterproof jacket, so it's easily accessible, and some gloves. It's still a bit damp from my ride and a bit smelly as well. Going to wash. And then in here was stuff I didn't need on a regular basis. And if you weren't wild camping and you stay in nice B&Bs and stuff, you probably need a tool actually. But we did some wild camping, all part of the adventure. So in here, I have a micro towel. I have a bivvy, mosquito net because Scotland, midges, and a sleeping bag, which once you put in, it's impossible to get out. And there is an Outkit Pipe Dream sleeping bag, not sponsored. And that's everything in the front pack. And that completes my minimalist, lightweight, trying to go as fast as possible bikepacking setup. Obviously what you need and what you're preferring to take will differ from what I use. But for me, it worked really well. I didn't carry anything I didn't use, and I think that's a key thing to remember. If you saw my previous video on bikepacking top tips, try and make sure everything you take you can use at least once, if not more. Otherwise it's just unnecessary weights really. So there we go. So that has been a detailed look at a bike and equipment setup I use for the Badger Divide, a 200-mile gravel bikepacking route in Scotland from Inverness to Glasgow. Definitely one I recommend. It was tough, really tough, and very, very remote, but also spectacular with breathtaking scenery and amazing, absolute first-class gravel of all grades, from fine dirt to massive boulders and routes and really quite gnarly terrain at times. I'll do a separate video on my experience later in the week. I said at the beginning of the video, for your guesses on the weight of this bike, and the weight of this bike, as you see it right here, with pedals, but no water bottles, and everything fresh from when I got off the bike at the end of the ride and put it in the back of the car and drove home. And the bike weighs 18 kilograms, 9.5 kilograms of which is the bike without the pedals. So quite impressed with how light I've managed to make the bike for this adventure. I'm not really sure how I could go lighter. There are probably a few things I didn't need to carry, but for the most part I used everything I took with me. I even wore the same shorts for 4 days. I know, the same shorts for 4 days, pretty gross, I know. But that's all in the pursuit of trying to minimize how much stuff I carry. Because while weight isn't everything, it definitely does make a difference on a long route like that. And I was glad I got the weight as low as possible. If I'm going for a longer adventure, I probably would go for a frame pack for more space for food in there, because this was pretty jammed at times, really at capacity. But yeah, pretty pleased how the bike worked. And for me, it puts to bed the idea that carbon fibre in the frame and wheels isn't tough enough, durable enough for a gravel bikepacking adventure. And I'm quite happy to use this bike again. Suspension fork was ace, loved that. Gearing, apart from being a bit big, was good. And the only thing that let me down was my GoPro Hero 9. Didn't like the Scottish rain much at all. Had to buy a new SD card from a hardware store. That's the only thing that let me down. But apart from that, it's all hunky-dory. Happy days indeed. So that's been my bike check. Let me know what you think by leaving a comment down below. Is this a bike you use for a similar adventure, or what would you use? Gravel bike, mountain bike, suspension, no suspension? So yeah, let me know your thoughts down below. But that is all for now. If you want to know more about gravel and bikepacking bikes, then check out this video up here. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that button down there. Okay, I'll see you all again very soon. Thanks for watching.